Hello and what's up, my friends? It is Thunderbob here, and tonight we are going to continue my look back at the Resident Evil series. If you've been following along, you will know that in the last 3 months I've replayed the entire series and released a retrospective review for each title, weighing my memories of playing them all those years ago in my younger days, and then how they hold up today replaying them. Tonight we're going to go and take a look at all of those games that I've replayed in the last 3 months and rank them. And I'm going to give you my overall thoughts on each individual game, the series overall, and my hopes for the future of the franchise. Now, I want to emphasize this is my personal opinion here, and you probably have your own list, and I'd love to hear about it in the comments below. If you want to drop me a message with how you would rank each game in the series. I don't think there is a wrong opinion here, as different people want and expect different things from the series. For me personally, the list is basically two things. I'm weighing them on how enjoyable I found them, and how well they exemplify the classic Resident Evil formula. And to that end, I think we should discuss what I consider the core components of a good Resident Evil game. Resident Evil for me is a survival horror game first, and an action game second. It's not about the perspective you play in, tank controls, or even how much action is included in the game, but rather if it focuses on the right survival horror components. And I think the core components are exploration, horror, and resource management. Exploration for me is the first component. In the best games of the series, you're exploring a unique location, be it a single mansion, a police station, the streets of Raccoon City, a European village, whatever it is. It should start small, but slowly reveal itself as you progress. And as you explore different passages and secrets and puzzles and scares, it starts to reveal itself and the world expands and the horror is exposed through the exploration. And speaking of horror, that's the second ingredient for me. A lot of the horror comes from the atmosphere of the location, and that is why that exploration element is so important. But there also needs to be a scary enemy, be it a zombie, the molded, the lichen, or whatever Capcom comes up with next. You need to be afraid that those enemies can kill you at any moment, that your character's alone, that a single mistake can mean your character is dead, perhaps with some lost progress as a consequence. And for me, the last element is resource management. Each game gives you different tools to overcome the horror, but it's important that they are limited. You never quite have enough, but through careful management of your resources, you can survive, thrive, and overcome the horror element. I also want to briefly talk about my thoughts on the generations of Resident Evil. And I think this series falls into 3 distinct generations that all have different strengths and weaknesses. I think the golden era comes first and started with the original Resident Evil and ended with Resident Evil 0. This era started very strongly with the original trilogy and only had a few weaker titles, in my opinion, like Code Veronica and Resident Evil 0. These games all had fixed camera angles, similar controls, gameplay, and an emphasis on horror. And next up comes the Silver Era. This started strong with Resident Evil 4, but ended very weakly with Resident Evil 6. This era pushed much more into the action side of the series, and by the end basically gave up on horror completely, and nearly killed the franchise in my opinion. Finally, we have the modern era. This started with Resident Evil 7, and has continued through Resident Evil 4 Remake, and hopefully Requiem. These games feel like a merging of both eras. They have a strong sense of horror, but also push the action to a point. It feels like these games, in my opinion, have perfected the formula by respecting all of the games that came before them. So let's go ahead and get started. I'm going to go game by game in release order of all of the mainline games, including Code Veronica and both Revelation games. And we're going to start out with the original Resident Evil, released back in 1996. And this is the game that started everything. I love the atmosphere, but I feel like nearly every other element, from the combat to the puzzles to the story, are better presented in later titles. This game is still really special to me because, and I mentioned this in my retrospective video, um, I played this originally back in like it was close to Christmas of '96. I didn't have any of the new generation consoles at the time. That was PlayStation 1, Saturn, Nintendo 64, and my parents basically said, "Hey, for Christmas we're going to get you one of these things. Tell us what you want." And I convinced them to let me rent each of them on separate weekends. And when I rented the PlayStation, I got I think it was Final Fantasy VII, and it was the original Resident Evil. And I played through the entire game in like a weekend, basically. And I played with it with my dad sitting on the couch behind me. And he was not a gamer, but I don't know, he was kind of fascinated by it, the horror and they had real actors in it, and it was much more cinematic. And it was a really cool experience. He was kind of guiding me through puzzles, and hey, you got to go back to that area. And it was just this a really special experience. And I lost both my parents a couple years ago. They passed away 4 years ago now, but I still have that memory of playing this game with him. And I don't know, it's real special to me. But at the same time, I think every subsequent game was an improvement on this. Like, this kind of set everything in motion, but almost every element was improved later. So I still want to put it high on my list because of the impact it has on the series and the genre and my personal connection with it. But I don't think I can put it in S. Like, I'm probably going to have too many games in S as it is. And S is essentially like almost perfection. Like, S is essentially like, it exemplifies all of the Resident Evil core kind of attributes. And it's just perfect. Like, I had a smile on my face the entire time I was playing it. And the games that fall into that category, that's really what it is. It's like every moment of this game, I enjoyed it. I had a smile on my face, even as I'm getting eaten by zombies. So I'm probably going to put Resident Evil in the A tier. I think that's probably the appropriate place for that game. And next up, we have Resident Evil 2, which this is a pretty special one. I remember I didn't end up getting a PlayStation after that Christmas I was talking about. I got a Nintendo 64, which may or may not have been the right choice. You could tell me. But I missed out on Resident Evil 2 until it was ported to the Nintendo 64 a few years later. And I really love this game. This is a sequel that I think does everything right. It took the original formula and perfected it. The campaign's pretty short, but it does have this really cool zapping system where you play the campaign as, one character, Leon, and then when you come back as Claire, it changes things up in really interesting ways, in ways that even the remake couldn't capture, I think. And the game introduced a lot of iconic elements, like a lot of interesting enemies, like the Lickers are one of the best enemies and added to the entire series. Mr. X, though he's not really featured until your second playthrough in the original game, is a really cool addition, and like the first tyrant that's kind of like following you throughout the game. And it's got one of the best locations in the entire series with the police station, one of the most well realized and just one of the best areas of any Resident Evil game. And I think that's why this is the first game that would fall into the S tier for me. It's just about perfect, and it's just so much fun, and it really exemplifies all of the key Resident Evil components to me. And next up, we have Resident Evil 3 Nemesis, which I didn't actually play at release. I didn't have a PlayStation, like I mentioned, and I didn't get to play this until it was ported to the GameCube a couple of years later. And by then I kind of moved on to, I think I was playing like 0 and the Resident Evil Remake and 4, and it just didn't have a big impact on me at the time. So I don't have a lot of nostalgia for this game. Maybe that's why it doesn't go as high for me as some people. Some people are probably going to hate me for my thoughts on this. It's not a bad game. Playing through it back to back with 1, 2, and then 3, it kind of feels like a B team put this together. Like the main team had moved forward to the next generation. Maybe they're working on Code Veronica or the remakes or 0. But it just, to me, it didn't hit quite the same note as 1 and 2. I do like that it's like you get to travel all over Raccoon City. And I mentioned this in the video, but I had like just thoughts before this came out, like how amazing would it be if you had a Resident Evil that just let you explore Raccoon City? And that's what this is. It just didn't quite come together for me. There's some annoying puzzles, and the backtracking just doesn't feel great to me. And Nemesis, the most unique aspect, is a bit overused. By the end, I wanted other bosses, and you basically just fight Nemesis over and over and over again, and the fights are not really changed much from fight to fight. This is the first game that had a mercenaries mode, which is a cool addition, and was really well utilized in later titles. I feel like it's a little lackluster here, but it's nice that it's there. So overall, it's good, but it's not great. This is actually, I would put it in a B tier personally. It's still a great game, but it falls short of Resident Evil 1 and 2 for me. And then we come to Code Veronica, which is another one I feel like I'm going to get crucified for my opinions on this game. I feel like it's very polarizing. Either you love it or you don't. And I didn't play this again at release. I got the GameCube version, which I still have, which is worth a decent chunk of money. And I think playing it today, it's not my favorite Resident Evil. It takes everything from the original trilogy and increases the scale. But for me, it mostly fails. Going from the pre-rendered backgrounds to 3D, I think was a mistake, as the Dreamcast just didn't have enough power to really make that transition. The locations are large, but I found them frustratingly large. There's so much backtracking back and forth across that couple of early zones. And then when you finally move on to the next area, Antarctica, you end up replaying those first areas again as Chris. Like, I almost quit the game right there. I was like, I'm finally done with the prison. I'm in a new zone. And then they sent me back to the prison for 2 hours. And it wasn't even hard. Like, I've heard some people, there's a lot of areas where you can get stuck and locked. I didn't have any of those. I didn't really find it that difficult. There's a couple of annoying things like the moths towards the end that are just stupidly annoying. So it wasn't really difficult. It was just kind of a frustrating game, and not in like a Resident Evil frustrating, just like in you're making me backtrack back and forth and respawning all these enemies. And so for me, this is like the first kind of fail in the series. And it might be, I don't have nostalgia for either 3 or Code Veronica. I didn't play them till a few years later, and maybe if I had played this at the time, it would have been a new game on a new system. I think that's a lot of people that have these fond memories and put it real highly, or people that played it when the Dreamcast came out and it was like mind-blowing at the time. But I think today it doesn't hold up as well as some of the other titles. And now we're coming to some good stuff. Resident Evil Remake, one of my favorite remakes, one of my favorite games of all time. Resident Evil Remake is amazing. And it's kind of crazy. This game still looks amazing today. You think about, like, Resident Evil came out in, 96? And the remake was, 2002? So, like, in just a couple of years, you went from these really simple, basic backgrounds to almost photorealistic graphics. And today, playing, like, the remaster on PC, this game still looks great. And I think it takes basically everything from Resident Evil and improves it in almost every way. Add some new scares with the Crimson Heads, and it really amps up the difficulty. Even 20 years later, it's one of the best looking games in the series, and it really respects the original while making just a few smart changes to the formula. I'm going to put this in the S tier for sure. And next we come to Resident Evil 0, which I've got mixed feelings on this one. And I do want to just mention, these days, these games take so long to release. Resident Evil Remake came out, and then Resident Evil 0 came out the same year. There's only a 7-month gap between the release of these two games, which is insane. I think, obviously, there were different teams making these games, but the fact that they had 2 mainline Resident Evil games released on the GameCube 7 months apart is pretty crazy. Now let's talk about the game itself. This is the last fixed camera game, and it's probably the best looking. Those early train areas look incredible, and even better than the Resident Evil remake, especially the remastered version. They were able to, I think, improve a lot in that remaster. This game today still looks incredible. And this is one of the first games that really experimented with the formula. They added things like character switching. So you have two characters you're playing with all the time. You can hit a button and go back and forth. They also got rid of the item box completely. Now you just drop items wherever you want on the floor. And I think that these changes were largely negative on the whole. And I would probably rate this even lower, but I played with a PC box mod. So I'm playing on the PC, and there's a mod that lets you utilize the save spot as an item box, which just removes so much frustration from this game. And I would recommend, if you're playing this today, play with the item box mod. You'll have a much better experience. It's kind of mediocre overall. The villain is one of the worst in the series. It's just this anime wannabe guy that feels out of place. Billy's cool though and should be brought back. He just disappears in the forest and is never heard from again. I think it would be cool to bring him back. But overall, like, it's very front loaded. The train station's really awesome, and then every other area is just not very well realized, and just feels like a rehash of previous areas. I still don't dislike it, so I'm gonna put this in the C tier. I think in my mind it's better than Code Veronica, which some people may hate me for saying this, but it does not reach like Nemesis kind of tier for me. And next up we come to Resident Evil 4, and this was the first game in the series to really shift from the traditional survival horror formula into a more action-oriented game. And I really love this game. I do think it started the shift into that action territory that culminated in Resident Evil 6, which is one of the worst games in the series. And I think like Resident Evil 4 was really massively successful and popular and reviewed well and sold well. And Capcom basically said like, oh, action is what we should be doing here. They didn't quite take the right lessons from the game. But this formula in this game, I think, was really utilized in 5, 6, and then in the later remakes and future games. Like it straddles the line between horror and action really well. It leans a little bit more into horror, but I love this game. This is, in the entire series, the game that I have replayed most. I've played the GameCube release at launch. I played the Wii launch. I played on PC. I've played the virtual reality version. I've played the HD mod more recently on PC. I love this game. Everything about it. I can't rave enough about it. It's still fun today. And I think the remake doesn't necessarily replace it. I think both of these games are worth playing today, and we'll talk about that more when I get over to the remake. But this is, for me, an S tier. No questions asked. And next up, Resident Evil 5, which I'm kind of mixed on as well. I remember being so hyped for this game back at release. I actually bought an Xbox 360 for it, and I even pirated, there was like a Japanese demo, and I pirated it and put it on a DVD just so I could play this demo, before it was officially released in the US. I don't remember all the logistics of it, but I was so hyped for it. And then the game came out, and I remember I liked it. I didn't love it. And replaying it, I understand better why. There's like half of a great Resident Evil here. The first half is quite good with some solid encounters, snappy pacing, scary moments. But the back half devolves into like a mediocre cover shooter that feels really out of place in the franchise. It's still fun as a co-op action game, but not really what I come to Resident Evil for. And the African setting is kind of nice, and early on it's well utilized, but it's really squandered by the end. And it really only matters to a few sections. By the end, it kind of devolves into these nondescript lab settings that a lot of the games I feel like kind of devolve into towards the end. I think this game is really ripe for a good remake. Take what works, and then kind of that last half of the game where it's just cover shooter and it's kind of annoying, you could pull back on that a little bit. So it's not a bad game. It's not a great game. It's definitely not in my A tier. It would fall into the B tier for me, kind of like in the Nemesis range. Yeah, that feels about right. And we've got the Revelations, the first Revelations game next. Overall, I enjoyed this game. I had not played it until, just this initial playthrough. I kind of always thought it was just like a portable, like spin-off and, wasn't a full Resident Evil experience. And I was wrong. This game goes hard. There's some encounters in this, some like lengthy gauntlet kind of sections that are just crazy, like Resident Evil 4 crazy. And but it still has a lot of that survival horror kind of aspect. Even though you can move and shoot at the same time, you move really slowly, and it's like a very exploration-based game. So it has like that classic Resident Evil sauce, but it has more of the modern kind of gameplay approach to it. I didn't love, there's like this thing where you change perspectives like every chapter, and you kind of lose momentum a lot, and there's some crazy characters. I'm trying to remember. Grinder and Jackass are two BSAA operatives that you play as for a lengthy couple of sections, and they're just a couple of jokers. I really want them to come back. Watch my review where I talk about it. But this is kind of a mid-range game for being a spin-off. It does a lot better than I would have thought, but it feels like probably right going in kind of like the B kind of section. It's not top tier. It's not as bad as Zero. I enjoyed it more than Zero for sure. And I played the PC version. I'll mention that. I didn't play the 3DS version, so that might have changed my perspective on it. But the PC version I played, I'd put in the B tier. And next up, Resident Evil 6, which in my mind is the worst Resident Evil, but it's an okay action game. If I was just rating this as a game in general, like take out the Resident Evil, component of this completely, it would probably be like a C. It's a fine action game, a fine co-op game. It's not offensively bad. Early on, the gunplay I found kind of bad, but it kind of clicked with me, and by the end, I found it okay. I actually thought the story was pretty decent, like the characters they pick here and the combinations that they pick, and then how these stories all kind of converge on each other. And the story it tells, it's fine, but it's the gameplay and the constant QTE, the chase sequences, the overall frustrating cover shooting, that brings it really down in my mind. Like, this is the least Resident Evil game, in my opinion. And as far as rating it as a Resident Evil game, I gotta put it in the F category. There's no Resident Evil game that has hit the lows of this game. Now, if you're just looking for an action game to co-op with your buddy, it's like a C to me. But as a Resident Evil game, it is definitely an F. It fails in almost every regard. There's no exploration. You're just always chasing a marker on your screen. There's no resource management. You could basically just melee your way through the game. And it's not horrible, but it's not a Resident Evil game in my mind. And next up, we've got Resident Evil Revelations 2, which I really enjoyed. I even enjoyed this more than the first Revelations game. I think it's a better and more personal story of a father searching for his daughter, which hit pretty close to home. I've got an 8-year-old daughter, and I lost my parents, and I don't know, the story here really worked for me. The gameplay was a lot of fun. It has kind of that Resident Evil 0 thing where you got two characters, but it just works better. The AI for the other characters just that much improved, and you had like a skill tree, and it really worked well for me. And I liked the character combinations and the fact that they brought back some old classic characters. Barry, from the original Resident Evil, was really given his due for the first time. And I liked that he was like this father figure to almost all the other characters. And this one really worked for me. The gameplay, the story, the presentation. I think with a slightly bigger budget, this could have been a mainline game. And I think I had more fun with this one than a lot of mainline games. So if you kind of passed up the Revelation games because you thought that they weren't, mainline games or they were portable games or whatever, you should check these out. And I'm going to put Revelations 2 in the A tier. I think that feels right for this game. And that leads us to Resident Evil 7. And I considered this probably the scariest game in the series. It's way more reserved and stripped down than Resident Evil 6, and it kind of feels like a response to that game. Like, that game had so much, 4 campaigns, 8 playable characters, so many set pieces and explosions and mechanics, and it almost feels like they said, you know what, we're going to try to go back to the roots. And they changed this to first person. So this is one of the games that most mechanically changed, but it feels almost more true to the classic Resident Evil formula. The exploration, the resource management, the horror. The horror is just put to the forefront here right from the beginning. Like, the first 2 hours of this are some of the scariest, not just Resident Evil, some of the scariest game I've played ever. And, I think this game really figured out the formula that it feels like all the subsequent remakes and games since then have kind of followed. I mean, they've gone a little bit more further in the action side of things at times, but I think this kind of figured out how to take Resident Evil and make it a more modern game. The only real negative I can think of is kind of the limited replay value. There's no mercenary mode. There's not a good incentive to replay. Like, there's not really a true New Game Plus mode. There are some cool DLCs, and the price is really low on this one. Like, if I paid, $60, $70 at release and an 8-hour game, from that standpoint, I'd be a little disappointed. But you can get this game for $10 or $20 these days, and it is such a blast to play. Honestly, I think the pacing is perfect. It's just about a perfect game. I'm going to put this in the S tier mostly just for how scary and how much it feels like it goes back to those old school Resident Evil roots. And then we get to Resident Evil 2 Remake. This is another nearly perfect remake that both respects the original, but also modernizes and makes the game more approachable. The story has been updated, and the characters and the acting are all improved. Like, the characters feel more like real people. The voice acting is a lot less silly than those original trilogy games. The graphics, the look of the game is just, it really was nearly perfectly translated. Like, you can, in a lot of cases, navigate the police station using your knowledge of that original game. Like, I know there are a few changes, but overall, it's close enough that you can kind of move around and know where to go. There's some aspects here that I think the original did better. Like, the zapping system was better in the original. Like, you can replay this game multiple times, and there's like an A and B scenario, but the changes with each playthrough are much, much smaller than in the original Resident Evil 2, and I think that's kind of a miss. But they also change things up, like Mr. X is introduced in your first playthrough, which I think is, a lot of people may only play this game one time, and if Mr. X wasn't introduced to the second time, you would never see him. So I think in some regards it's better, but the zapping system was clearly better in the original game. But I still think this is almost a perfect remake. I love this game. It's so much fun. I've played through it a couple of times since release, and this would be another nearly perfect game. I have a smile on my face the entire time I'm playing it, and it really exemplifies all of those core Resident Evil components. It is also very scary. I think next to Resident Evil 7, this might be one of the scarier games in the series for me. And then we get to the Resident Evil 3 remake, which I think was kind of a miss. Like, of the modern era, I think this is the biggest failure. It's not bad, but it's not as good as the original Resident Evil 3. This is a very short game. It feels almost like an expansion to the Resident Evil 2 remake. It uses a lot of the same assets, some of the same locations, and it's super short. It's like 6 hours on your first playthrough with not a lot of reason to replay the game. They cut multiple areas from the original, like the clock tower and the graveyard, without adding much to compensate. And the game really focuses more on the action than the horror. Like, it doesn't go as hard as like Resident Evil 6, but it is very action focused with less emphasis on that exploration and the resource management side of things. And they cut so much. I almost wish they would like remake the remake. Like, you could keep what's here, but add in those missing couple of areas and take this from like a 6 hour to like a 9 hour game. I think would be a big improvement. So, like, it's not straight up bad, and especially for the price. It's a really short game, and you can get this for like $10 these days. If you paid $60 for this, I'd put it in like the F tier. Um, just if, for 10 to 20 bucks, I'd say it's probably like in the C tier. Like, I probably had more fun than Code Veronica 6 or 0. But I don't think I enjoyed it as much as the original Nemesis 5. Yeah, C seems like the right spot for this game. And next up, we've got Resident Evil Village, which feels like a game that took the best aspects of Resident Evil 4 and Resident Evil 7 and kind of like made them kiss and have a baby together, and it turned into this like eldritch abomination that just merges almost perfectly. It's got the Resident Evil 4 kind of gameplay feel to it. It's a lot more action packed than 7, but it's still keeping that first person perspective and a lot more focus on the horror than 4 did. And it has, a really good story, and I love how each area feels really distinct. It's got kind of like that Universal monster vibe where there's like, you got like an area that's full of werewolves, an area that's full of like Frankenstein monster kind of, and you got the vampire ladies, and each has a very like dark fairy tale feel to it. It feels very unique. It's almost like 4 distinct games pushed together. It really does push the action a lot more than 7, but it still maintains the feeling of Resident Evil with a lot of exploration, and resource management's pretty important. Just a ton of like hidden secrets all over the place. And between 7 and 8, I think Ethan gets the most complete story arc for any main character in the series. He's introduced and he saves his wife and he has a family and a daughter and ends up, having to sacrifice himself to save everybody. And there's DLC that shows what happens to his daughter, which I think chronologically is the furthest in the timeline that the Resident Evil has ever explored. And I think it's kind of funny, he's only been in 2 games, but he's got probably the most complete story arc out of any of the main characters in the series. I really do like this game. I think it falls just a little short of like 7. I know 7's a lot more scaled back, but I think 7 is like paced and built perfectly, and it doesn't quite hit that territory, but I think it still is an S for me. Like, it would be, if you asked me from one day to the next, they'd probably be like, it's an A or an S. It's like a low S, but not quite to an A. But yeah, that feels about right. I think it's still probably S territory for me. And last but not least, we got Resident Evil 4 Remake, which for me is nearly another perfect remake. It takes like nearly every element from the original and amplifies the things that work, and it corrects the few small mistakes that the original had, like the over-reliance on quick-time events in the original. It cut most of those out, and I think it improved the game by doing so. It takes the areas from the original and recreates them nearly perfectly, but also expands on them and improves the graphics and atmosphere immensely. The story is a bit more serious, a bit more grounded than the original, which had a lot of silliness. And I think the remake removes a certain amount of that silly campiness, for better or worse. You might really enjoy that aspect of the series. But I think it actually works here and makes the game a little bit scarier. And there's some changes to the story, like Lewis sticks around a lot longer and has a nice team up with Leon, which I think is a great change. And the gameplay has been updated a bit. It's a little slower paced, I think, because there's more like weight and momentum to your character now. You have to kind of play a little bit more deliberately than in the original. And the gameplay options have been expanded. You've got some stealth kill options. You've got the knife that you can now block attacks with. I think the gameplay systems have been improved. The weapons are more balanced. Things like when you upgrade a weapon and you sell it back, you keep the majority of those resources, makes it where you can start upgrading a lot earlier. And it just makes the early game a little bit less frustrating at times. And, I would say this is on par if not ever so slightly better than the original. And I think the remake and the original are different enough that there's really still value in playing both of them. Like, they're both still great games. I think the remake, in my mind, it might be the one that I go to on my yearly basis, and then I replay the original maybe every 5 years or something, where it used to be I'd play 4 like once a year, it felt like. It's just a great remake. I could totally recommend either the original or the remake, but if you're a new player coming to the Resident Evil franchise, this might be a good starting point. It doesn't feel like you need a lot of knowledge of the previous games, and it is just a blast to play through. Yeah, totally love it, and I would put this into the S tier for sure. Okay, so that's the mainline series. I've got just a couple others down here. I've actually only played substantially the Darkside Chronicles and the Umbrella Chronicles. So I'm going to throw those on here. I didn't do a retrospective for them, but I thought I would include those. I would put both of these games in the C tier. I love light gun games. I've got actually a decent amount of coverage on the channel of the Sinden light gun, and I've played these games with the Sinden light gun. I think they tell a decent story that kind of like encapsulates some of the previous games in interesting ways, and it's just a fun light gun Resident Evil game. These other 5 I do intend to go through. Actually, I think Umbrella Chronicles you can't play anymore, but the couple of spin-offs I haven't played through, I intend to actually go back, and maybe I'll do a video on them if I feel like it's worthwhile. But this is the entire mainline series, plus kind of the more meaningful spin-off games. I know it's a little top-loaded here, but all of these games I feel like are close to perfect. I play them and have just a smile on my face, and they really exemplify the things that I love about the series. Now, I just want to spend a minute talking about Requiem. That's the newly announced Resident Evil 9, and what I've seen on it looks really interesting. It seems like they're maybe going back and pushing the horror side of things from the little snippets of gameplay they've shown and some of the quotes I've read from the developers. It almost feels like they want to go back to kind of like the 7 kind of horror-focused, less action. We'll see how that plays out. I would actually like that. You know, the last couple have progressively got more and more action-packed from Resident Evil 7 and 2 Remake, which had action but not a ton of it, to Resident Evil 3 Remake and Village and 4. The action has really, if they keep going this trajectory, they could wind up in a 6 situation again, which I don't want. So I kind of hope maybe they pull back on the action just a little bit. You make it kind of a cross between, 7 and Village. Really focus on the horror, but keep the exploration, the resource management. Don't just make it a run-and-gun game. And I'm really hopeful for Requiem. I think it looks really good. I think making Ashcroft, who is the daughter of a character from Outbreak, from my understanding, that's an interesting pull. And I kind of hope they bring Leon back. There's been a lot of rumors that he's going to show up in the game. That would be very cool to maybe have like a final story, a final arc to his story. That would be an awesome ending point, maybe. Yeah, so we'll see where the future brings us. I'm very excited for it, and I will certainly do some coverage when it comes out, and probably another video with my thoughts on that game. So I'll end it there. I do want to thank you if you've watched my retrospectives, if you've liked, if you've dropped me a comment. Really appreciate everyone out there. I'm going to end the video. Again, thank you for watching, and have a good night, everybody.